at the bottom of your screen, you'll find a chat box. We want you to use this fully. So let us know who you are, where you've come from, perhaps a bit about whether it's your first meeting or not. It's also a place where you can have a discussion behind the scenes as the speaker is proceeding. Now, the way that it works is that we will have everybody on mute, but we want to involve you. So you may be asked to unmute and give a contribution, which we love. If there is something that you want to add, please make it really obvious. There may be additional questions in the chat box at the end of the session that we can't get to, because we do like to finish promptly around 2:30. And if this happens, Sarah has offered to pick these up, and we'll record that and we'll put that on the website as well. So everything will be on LinkedIn and will be added to the website. So in a moment, we've got Jimmy Quinn, who is our president-elect and next president, and he's going to be introducing our speaker. But before we do that, I'm just going to run through some IOSH news. So we love Twitter in Chiltern, so please get onto your Twitter, join in the conversation, carry on chatting. The whole reason we're here is to provide that support whilst we're working in a new way. All of our slides following our events will be placed first on the LinkedIn site, but they will also go onto the Chiltern area of the main IOSH website. So you will find the slides in there afterwards, along with the recordings. So what have we been up to and what have we got planned? So we've got a fantastic range of sessions for members. So we'll be moving on to Sarah in a moment. Peter Bennett is the MD of PASMA and chair of the Access Industry Forum, and he's going to be with us next week, so that will be a great session. Balancing up with Sarah's session today, we've got Stephen Haynes from Mates in Mind, so we're going to be focusing on men's mental health in that session. Richard White, who is our committee cyber bouncer, is a real whiz with Zoom, and he certainly helped us get up to speed here at Chiltern. So he's going to be running a session. If you're a trainer and you're moving your training over to technology, it could be Zoom, it could be any of the other technologies, Richard is going to run through some hot tips that will help you as a trainer. So, you know, certainly if you've seen a dip in your training because you've not been able to get out, that definitely is a session for you. We're going to continue our fantastic session that we had with the South Wales branch, talking about membership grades. So we're kind of creating a series with that, and what you will find is that other branches are doing similar sessions. So we're going to try and link up where we can with branches around the globe to do that. As many of you know, Chiltern branch is definitely going global. We've got members of the committee, not just from the UK, but from the Caribbean. Tim's in Italy, soon to be in Sweden. So we're certainly an international branch. So Kurt's going to be running a session in August with an international speaker. And in early September, we're going joint with the Yorkshire branch, and we're running a well-being session, but we wanted to cover some topics that are unusual, and I know we've got some members of the Yorkshire branch with us today. So we're going to talk about inclusion, we're going to talk about sleep health, and the one that I'm really looking forward to is corporate psychopaths. So how do we deal with those people in the workplace? So some great sessions coming up. We are monitoring numbers because as we get back to our new normal, we may not be running sessions in quite the same way. So our session from last week, if anybody came, it was an excellent session. and we had Greg Dearsley, who is the president of the New Zealand Institute for Safety Management, and he did a fantastic talk on looking at how they've managed the whole COVID crisis in New Zealand, because I think it's been held up as a really good example. And he also talked a lot about leadership, well-being. So that was a really fantastic session. So if you weren't able to make that session live, that is on the IOSH, on the Chiltern pages of the IOSH website. Now, something else that Greg did that we're really grateful for is, again, there were more questions in the chat box than we were able to get to in the time that we had. So Greg has actually gone back and recorded the answers to some additional questions. So we're moving into the realms of mini podcasts from Chiltern, I would say. And actually that's something that Sarah has offered to do for us today if the same things happen. So absolutely well worth a catch up if you didn't make that session. So what's going on in IOSH? And it always amazes me, even though we're weekly, that things just seem to happen every week, and they're changing every week. So firstly, you know, we are always looking out for helpers on the Chiltern committee, and you know, if you are interested in helping us while we're in the tech world, that would be fantastic. We have weekly meetings as a committee on a Friday lunchtime. So even if you're not quite sure whether it's something that you'd like to be involved in, by all means, make contact with one of us, and by all means, come and join our weekly chat. So you can try us out before you commit to anything, but we'd love to have you. And we're really committed to having a mix of people. So if we can have, as you know, it doesn't matter which stage of your career you're in, where you are, we'd be interested to have, we'd love to have you on the committee. In terms of the weekly webinars, so we've got the weekly webinar tomorrow lunchtime with IOSH, so you'll find the link to that on the main IOSH LinkedIn page, and that's all around ensuring the safety and health of workers in travel and tourism. So you'll find that. Go and look at what the other branches and sector groups are doing, because there's some amazing variety of sessions. The council ballot, which we've been talking about council quite a lot, and I know that I've got council members on the line here today. The council ballot will open next Wednesday, and we'll be talking some more about that next week, because remember, council is the voice of the membership. So it's your opportunity to nominate somebody that you know, or multiple people that feel represent your views. So have a look at that. So remember, IOSH are updating its guidance pages around COVID-19 at the moment. There's a helpline that's being created. So if you feel like you need to give somebody a buzz and run through something, by all means use that. There's some really good guidance out there. There's some e-learning tools that are well worth looking at as well. So do have a look at that. Now, the other really important piece of news, and I'm going to hand over to Jimmy Quinn, who's president-elect, in a moment, but the call has gone out for people to consider joining the presidential team. Now, as many of you know, as well as being the chair of the Chiltern branch, I'm also a serving vice president, and each year 2 new vice presidents are elected. Now, to become a vice president, you will need to be a chartered member who is a member of council, a chartered member who is a member of a network, so that's either a branch or group committee. So that means if you're in You don't have to be a member of council. You could be in a branch or group committee, or you're a chartered member who is a member of a standing or nominations committee, subcommittee, or working party. So that's quite a mouthful. But all of that information is coming through, and also chartered fellows. So I'm going to hand over to Jimmy in a moment, because Jimmy's going to be our next president from September, and I'm going to ask Jimmy to talk a little bit more about that, and also Jimmy's going to introduce our speaker for today. So first of all, Jimmy, thank you so much for supporting this session, because we've certainly advertised it. You know, this is a topic for everybody. So thank you for being here today. And if you could just say a few words about, you know, perhaps if people are contemplating joining the presidential team, and introduce our speaker. Jimmy, over to you.
Many thanks, Louise, and thank you for the invite today to come along and introduce Sarah. Absolutely supporting what you're saying about the vice presidents and the presidential team. To be able to come into that role, it's a role where you can be the ambassadorial side for the good of the membership, but also to take the message that IOSH are saying as well, but also to really get out there and be able to support membership. And as you and I know, some of what we've already done this year, which I'll be sort of releasing to council in a couple of weeks' time, is we really like to talk membership. We like to talk branches. We like to talk groups. We like to reach out to our relationship managers as well as part of that presidential team and try and bring those things together. And so for all those people that are looking at becoming a member of council, congratulations to them. I'll be looking forward to the votes next week. And also for those that would like to become or try to become a vice president of the institution, I would absolutely say 100% go for it. It's a busy volunteer role, probably a lot busier than a lot of people think. But remember, we're linking out to the membership, but we're also that ambassador element of IOSH as well. So yes, absolutely go for it. Okay, so thank you very much, Sarah, for coming today, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation. And just as part of a small bio, everyone, Sarah Davies is a multilingual, experienced and qualified business coach, facilitator and trainer who previously spent over 10 years in senior international corporate roles before recruiting senior executives with hydrogen struggles across the professional services and retail sectors. Early in her career, Sarah worked in the IT industry at FTSE ICL, Fujitsu ICL, working in international business development and client management positions for global clients. She also worked at Thomas Cook, running their B2B global and financial services business for Western and Southern Europe. Sarah has played an active role in a number of major cultural change and business transformation initiatives, working at board level. Sarah also feels passionate about making a difference in people's lives and was business manager to leading menopause expert Dr. Louise Newson, helping her launch www.menopausedoctor.co.uk and subsequently launched Talking Menopause in 2017 to focus on educating and supporting men and women across all levels of organisations about the menopause. Really looking forward to this, Sarah. Over to you.
Thank you, Jimmy, and hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're not sweltering too much in this incredible heat. I am just going to, so whoever's host, if they could let me share my screen, please, because I'm not able to at the moment. So while I'm waiting to share my screen, so as Jimmy said, my introduction to menopause was through Menopause Doctor. Menopause Doctor, aka Dr. Louise Newson, happens to actually, I'll share it, happens to be my sister. She's the GP in the family. And about 5-6 years ago, she decided to set up, still can't share my screen for whoever's hosting. she decided she was increasingly frustrated over the years that women had very little support. So from a medical point of view, very frustratingly, the average GP in the UK, and it's quite similar worldwide, has had very little or no training on how to support menopausal women. And as a result, she decided to set up and open a menopause clinic. There was no NHS funding. Apologies for my dog barking, but my children will sort it out. And there was no NHS funding. So she set up a private clinic, and I decided I was a little bit of a careers crossroads, and I became her business manager. And it was eye-opening for both of us. Interestingly, both of us were perimenopausal at the time and didn't realize it. Any problems with seeing my screen, please let me know, but hopefully you can all see my screen now. And it was incredible, the lack of support that there is in the country medically for women, the lack of knowledge. None of us are taught about menopause. It is a natural life event that all women will go through. So a huge proportion of the population, but we're not taught about it. It is effectively a long-term hormone deficiency in our bodies. Her clinic absolutely snowballed. She, over 18 months ago, has now got a menopause and wellbeing centre, albeit virtual at the moment, in Stratford-upon-Avon, and has about 12 doctors working with her. She's also, interestingly, she's doing a lot of campaigning to improve the medical training for menopause in the country, and also is currently working closely with Public Health England. So I don't know if any of you have signed up to the COVID symptom tracker app that's available. So she has actually been instrumental in menstrual and HRT questions being added onto that app, because there is a certain amount of research, and more research is being carried out going forward now, that actually estrogen has a protective factor in our bodies, and actually there are more men from COVID, and there's some research going into that. So I haven't got time to talk about that today, but that's just a little bit of background. I met my co-founder, who on the screen, Linda Bailey, who actually through my sister. Linda was a police inspector at West Midlands Police. She, in her mid-40s, was off work for 3 months, which actually was her menopause. She didn't realise it at the time. She went from managing a team of 100 to literally not having the confidence to open her front door. Her anxiety levels went through the roof. She had heart palpitations. She had aching joints. She was off work for 3 months, but she tried to get medical help. Nobody diagnosed menopause. The cardiologist she saw said, yes, my wife gets similar palpitations, and no other comment. And so we joined forces. She put menopause on the map in West Midlands Police, the second largest police force in the country, and then a couple of years later decided to take early retirement. So we joined forces, and over the last couple of years we have trained over 6,000 employees across over 50 companies, public and private sector. We've worked with a number of police forces, as you'd expect, fire services, some of whom have made menopause training mandatory for managers, which has been incredibly enlightening and positive. And then we've worked banks, retailers, so a real mixture of organisations. And menopause, as Louise has already said, is absolutely relevant and important for everybody to understand it. I would just like to throw a question out to you. So I'd like you to, when I say what does menopause mean to you, what is the first thing that springs to mind? So just let me see if I can get the chat function back here. So it'd be interesting just to hear from you, what are the first things that spring to mind? So if you could just type in the chat box, please, because actually menopause does mean different things to different people. Overall, there is no common understanding. So we've got lack of control, someone's mentioned, hot flushes, aching joints, worry, somebody else. Someone's come on asking about, is there a definitive test for the menopause. I will come on to that shortly. Brain fog, absolutely. Fear of losing my mind, massive change in women's hormones, end of childbearing age, absolutely. So there is overall, there isn't really a common understanding of what the menopause is. Thank you for sharing those. There's a lot of negative narrative around the menopause. Be interesting to hear later on after the presentation any personal experiences you've had, or comments even in the workplace. We've had a lot of different comments, such as negative Nelly, old hag, old bag, oh, you're going to the Menopause conference. At a commercial bank, they call it, oh, you're having a granny moment. So there's lots of negative, and I think for those Brits of us on the webinar, we as Brits, if we feel awkward about a subject, or we don't know enough about it, we tend to make a joke about it, unfortunately. So the menopause and work. So why now? Why is menopause and work important currently? Well, from a legal point of view, and I would again ask the question hypothetically, who thinks menopause could be a disability? Anybody at all think? Let me just have a quick look to see if anybody's replied. So no, it's a restriction to work, absolutely. So it could be considered as a disability, because under the Equality Act 2010, as it says here, so that protects people from discrimination in the workplace. So with regards to the Equality Act and menopause, so menopause is sex related because it affects women, and also, it's aged typically. There's a huge age band with menopause as well, but actually it's around the protected characteristics. And as someone has mentioned here, absolutely correct, it's actually that the health effects or the symptoms can be disabling. So actually, the definition of a disability under the Equality Act is a long-term illness or impairment that affects somebody working and their ability to work over a sustainable period of time, and that period of time is a year. So if the symptoms do go on for a year, and if an individual has actually recorded them or mentioned them to their employer, actually it can be disabling. I haven't got time to mention it now, but there is a case, Davies, so my surname, the Scottish Tribunal Court Service, where actually she was dismissed, and it was due to her menopause symptoms, and reinstated. So if you are interested, that might be worth looking at. So health and safety at work, I don't need to tell any of you guys about health and safety at work, because you're certainly the experts, not me. But actually it's about looking at the environment of the workplace, everything, and I'll come on to it a little bit with symptoms, but the physical environment, is that supportive to actually somebody who is incredibly suffering day to day in their working environment? And I will touch on risk assessments and reasonable adjustments a little later. Someone's mentioned about testosterone deficiency for men, and I will mention that there is something called the andropause, but I'll mention that briefly in a sec. So from an economic point of view, as we all know, women are greater numbers before. Looking at the other extreme, 100 years ago, the average age of the menopause was 58, and the average age that women died was 59, and life was very different then. Even, 30, 40 years ago, working life was very different. Now more and more women are working longer, women have worked really hard to get where they are in their careers, and they don't want to be giving up and suffering, and a lot of women do tell us that unfortunately they do hit this glass ceiling. They're struggling with their symptoms, and especially around confidence levels, lack confidence to actually move on up their career ladders. And also what is incredibly important actually, and we all talk obviously a lot about, especially current climate, looking after our staff and retaining our staff, but actually it is the cost of a woman who is suffering at work being inefficient and her productivity levels dropping, or more importantly, if she's off sick, or worst case, actually leaves her job for replacing that woman, the cost is a lot greater than potentially understanding the menopause and putting in some reasonable adjustments in place, for example. The social side I've already touched on, that negative stereotyping, unfortunately. And as I said, we've grown up, probably all of us, thinking a menopause happens at some point, a few hot flushes, perhaps some mood swings, periods stop, and that's it really, and we're not taught about it. That is changing. We've been involved with a campaign to Parliament, so it was meant to be this year. I think it might be postponed, but menopause, they've committed to menopause being introduced in secondary school education, which is positive for the next generation coming up. So it's incredibly important that it does sit on workplaces' well-being agenda from an understanding point of view, and a lot of the challenges with menopause are very similar to mental health. And it's not just supporting the women going through the menopause, but it's about supporting their colleagues and the managers, because we can focus on the women, but actually, we've run a lot of managers workshops. It's incredibly hard for managers, male and female, or even colleagues, to actually pick up on the symptoms and have that conversation. Having that conversation can be really hard. So having symptoms, which I am going to touch on a little bit, what menopause is, because we feel that it's very important that everyone has that non-biased, evidence-based facts on menopause, but it can lead to productivity and performance, not surprisingly, time management, that emotional resilience. Really hard to often control our emotions. Some women say to us that they just don't know themselves anymore. They feel kidnapped and trapped in their own bodies, and not surprisingly, their inability to complete tasks effectively. Stress levels increase. From a survey that was carried out 3 years ago, over 20% of women considered leaving their jobs, and actually 10% actually did leave their jobs due to their menopause symptoms. We ran some menopause champion workshops at the University Hospital's NHS Trust in Birmingham, and at one of the sessions, a manager who managed 60 staff, she said that she had 10 women who in her team who had been off for at least 3 weeks, and after coming to our workshop, she now realised from these sick notes that had come through that actually it was down to the menopause. Not going to go through each of these, but overall, not surprisingly, that lower commitment to work and organisation, resulting in reduced job satisfaction. So, which can obviously mean, as I've already touched on, missing out on promotion, training, having to reduce hours, losing a lot of confidence, contributing to the wider gender pay gap. It is definitely a challenge that is discussed a lot on the diversity and inclusion agenda, and as I've already touched on, loss of very valuable skills and talent. So just wanted to share with you top level results of a survey we carried out. So most of our clients carry out an anonymous client survey. So earlier this year, Manchester Metropolitan University analysed some of it for us. So there were over 1,500 respondents across 14 organisations. 91% of respondents, of the women who replied, said they'd had little or no acknowledgement at work. It wasn't just women, there were managers, male and female, and colleagues, but the majority of respondents were female. They felt they had to hide and mask their symptoms at work. They didn't feel that they had the confidence to open up and share their symptoms. And actually, as you can see, the majority had absolutely no confidence in having a conversation because of this taboo there is around it, the stigma and embarrassment. And not surprisingly, just to back up what I've just said, over 80% said that it had a moderate or extremely high impact on their performance. pretty much everybody who responded, so this includes that the managers and the male employees, felt it important to normalise menopause at work. Although overall in these organisations, and these are all organisations that we've worked with, but this was as we kicked off our work with them, that up to that point there was little evidence overall to suggest there was enough support out there. And actually, to be fair, some organisations the support is there, but then women and managers and colleagues don't necessarily know where to access that support. And these are some quotes I wanted to just share with you, some of which is sort of similar. So someone ended up going off sick for 2 months. Again, it's about that daily struggle, really. So I really wanted to just touch on briefly, before I come back to the menopause at work, on what the menopause is. So as I mentioned, the menopause is actually a long-term hormone deficiency. The menopause, by definition, is actually only one day in our lives. So it's actually the day when we have not, as women, had a period for a year. So actually, even though we talk about menopause lasting a long time, the menopause means a pause in the menstrual cycle, and it's the one day, by definition, when we haven't had a period for a year. I just wanted to comment. I noticed that there's quite a few comments coming up, which I will come back to and look at later on. Don't worry, I won't ignore them. So most of us go through a natural menopause, but there's also an induced menopause. So an induced menopause meaning, for example, a woman who's had a hysterectomy, or an oophorectomy when their ovaries are removed as well, or actually when some women who've had estrogen receptive breast cancer, their bodies will be propelled into menopause, or hysterectomy, they can go into menopause a lot quicker with all the estrogen removed from their bodies. Now there's a term, I don't know if any of you heard about it, called perimenopause. And actually it means around the time of the menopause. And this again, quite often women are perhaps waiting for their periods to stop, but actually for women, if they wait for their periods to stop, it becomes almost a retrospective diagnosis, because there can be fluctuation in symptoms, there can be changes in periods, but there can be symptoms that occur quite a few months or years before women's periods actually stop. And that time is called the perimenopause. And then by definition, after this one day in our lives, it's post-menopause. There's been you've probably seen the question, because it's gone to everybody, about should menopause be included under a wider umbrella of hormone challenged? Absolutely, because as I've mentioned, it is a long-term hormone deficiency, and I'm going to show you a little diagram shortly, which explains why. The average age in the UK is 51 with the age band, but really importantly, and someone has just shared very, sadly, who was affected when they were incredibly young, age 21, and they are, in fact, 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 will actually experience an early menopause, and 1 in 1,000 under the age of 30, which is another reason why it's so important, not just for menopausal, women, or the age band between mid-40s and mid-50s. It's really important that that awareness is there for younger employees as well, because it does affect people. And it's, and for the younger women, it's even harder, because it doesn't seem normal, for them or also for their colleagues. There is an amazing charity called the Daisy Network, which supports early menopause. So POI on my slide here refers to premature ovarian insufficiency, which is why when younger women go into an early menopause. So I'm not going to give you a big science lesson here, but I just want to show this chart because it shows very simply what happens to the two main hormones in women's bodies. So the two main hormones, estrogen and progesterone in our ovaries, and it's when they stop working so well that we hit this menopausal phase in our lives and our hormones start changing in our bodies and the symptoms occur. So if you look at the orange line to start with, progesterone, now progesterone acts, it's a bit like, pretty bluntly, I guess it's a bit like a lawnmower in our wombs. Estrogen feeds our wombs. It has a lot of other benefits, which I'll share with you in a second. But progesterone, protects the lining of our wombs. So women with wombs, it's a very important hormone. It also helps promote good sleep as well. Now those levels fall quite dramatically, but quite consistently. Whereas on the other hand, estrogen, as you can see from the purple line, goes on this crazy roller coaster ride. There's no timeline because everybody's menopause lasts a different length of time. The average length that the menopause symptoms can last in the UK is between 4 and 9 years. And so you can see the estrogen levels drop, and it's when these levels start to drop and when they're at their lowest that women's symptoms are at their worst. So they go on this crazy roller coaster ride and then do flatten off eventually, albeit at a lower level. So we never get those levels naturally back to what they were before in our bodies. Now there is also a third hormone that someone has suggested. Who knows what the third hormone is? That is actually very important to women as well as men. Anyone? It's actually, oh sorry, it's actually testosterone, and actually it plays an important role in our bodies as well. It can have an impact on concentration and energy levels, and that does fall. And very briefly, because it was brought up in a question, I haven't got my slide on it today, but there is a male menopause called the andropause that some of you might have come across. It affects about 10% of men. All men's testosterone levels do gradually drop after a certain age. 10% of men will have some symptoms similar to women, but not to the extent of the female menopause. So it's something to be mindful of, and I think also it's important to highlight that the menopause obviously will affect anybody who has effectively female anatomy, because we have worked with some transgender clients as well. So just get back to here. So effectively, you might be thinking, well, she's talking about estrogen and ovaries, but actually we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies. So as you can see from this diagram, there is not a part of our body that is not touched by the menopause. So for example, because we have these estrogen receptors scattered all over our bodies, and when the levels fall, so for example, in our brain, estrogen plays a role with our memory function, and which is why so many women suffer from brain fog, because when the estrogen levels are low in our bodies, unfortunately that affects the way estrogen works with our other hormones like serotonin, cortisol, etc., and does really affect our memory function. The body temperature adjustment, so estrogen does play a little bit of an internal thermostat in our bodies. Hence the hot flushes or the night sweats. 70% of women will experience a hot flush. Also, the heart. Estrogen plays a very important role actually protecting the lining of the blood vessels from thickening, which is why when I come on to HRT, for example, hormone replacement therapy, it actually reduces heart disease in women by 50%. So women, a lot of women suffer from aching bones, for example. Women suffer from itching skin. Again, it's because of this estrogen receptors around our bodies. So it's responsible for the elasticity of our skin. It has an impact on our metabolic rate, so much as we perhaps are reaching for a glass of wine or some sweet to have, sweets or sugar to have that quick energy boost because we're feeling so exhausted, but actually, and then wonder why we've put on weight, but actually estrogen just does play a role in that. And Also, a lot of women suffer from urinary frequency, increased urinary frequency, increased infections, and dare I say it, I will say the words, over 70% of women suffer from vaginal dryness or vaginal challenges, which again, we don't talk about because we're very proud and we're very British, and I'm not saying that you, especially the men, the audience, need to go out and talk about it, but some women suffer so badly they can't walk, they can't sit down. A woman came to my sister's clinic and she hadn't worn trousers for a year. And that is because of estrogen acting as a lubrication, and it can dry up that part of the body, and also can have a massive impact on sex life as well. So hopefully that gives you a sort of a brief overview of different parts of the body and how estrogen can actually affect us. This is our little affectionate Meno lady, which any of you are interested, I can send you the PDF. Apologies that it's a bit blurred here. But there are, on this picture here, there are about 35 symptoms, but actually, I think my sister's added up to about 80 different symptoms overall related to the menopause. Quite a few of our clients have used this image and put it on the back of toilet doors, which actually is how it was originally created from a colleague at West Midlands Police, just to put the words out, just to highlight it. So actually, let me just go back. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Let me just go back to that slide, because someone has asked what symptoms should colleagues and friends look for. So these symptoms here, so there's a mixture of physical symptoms and psychological symptoms, which I haven't got a chance to go into sort of massive detail now, but the physical symptoms might be aching joints, hot flushes. Certainly hot flushes is that you might see a colleague going through. Hair loss can be one, itchy skin, headaches, increases. Certainly someone who suffers from migraines can get a lot worsening migraines, nausea as well. But the psychological symptoms affect women so much more than the physical ones. So it could literally be a simple but very frustrating, not quite being able to get the words out of their mouths, not remembering people's names. So that complete brain fog. It can also, the other psychological symptoms often are around lack of confidence, or not just being able to do simple tasks. So perhaps a colleague who is not performing as perhaps they usually are, they're not firing on all symptoms, for example. That could be, you know, a sign, and depending obviously how well even, if I can get my words out, how well you know your colleague, whether that could be a menopausal symptom. Certainly, you know, if you hear someone talking a lot about, or, you know, they've been awake all night or not sleeping, for example, they get more anxious. Anxiety is a massive symptom that affects the majority of women. So I guess it's that overall emotional changes, which is harder in current climate, obviously, because there are a lot of different emotional challenges going on anyway with current climate, compounded by all of these thrown into the mix. So it's difficult to identify, and it's certainly because over 70% of women don't recognise that their symptoms are down to the menopause. So, you know, if they can't recognize it, how can you as a colleague, you know, what chance have you got? So it's incredibly challenging and difficult. So just put on here an example, you know, women having a hot flush. Sorry, just maximize something by mistake, the chat by mistake there. So for women going through a hot flush, and anyone, I'm lucky I haven't experienced a hot flush, although my room at the moment is very hot and I feel like I'm almost having one. But it's like an internal furnace in a woman's body. Some women say it starts in the chest, sometimes some women say it starts in their feet, and it is literally like turning on an internal furnace switch in their body. They can't control it, often can't speak, often look visibly hot and flushed. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But for it can be seconds, it can be a few minutes, can't do anything, feel completely helpless, feel they need to isolate themselves, which is very hard in many working environments, especially for those frontline staff who actually can't, they haven't got access to a safe place to go and sit, they haven't got access to a toilet, for example. So stress can exacerbate hot flushes, but not necessarily, because it's mainly due to these hormone levels. So from a psychological point of view, I've mentioned those symptoms. I've mentioned that a lot of women feel trapped in their own bodies. A lot of women feel they're wading through treacle. A lot harder to concentrate, and also have those emotional outbursts without being able to control, which is incredibly hard when you're working with a number of colleagues and managing also teams. So I wanted to very briefly, and I can answer questions on this, and I could talk for hours about them, but I haven't got the time today. So, but there are solutions. So the key thing is, and unfortunately a lot of them are the unknown, like I said, menopause is so individual. It's different for everybody. Somebody might, and actually what I didn't say, actually 80% of women will experience symptoms, and a quarter of those 80% will have really severe debilitating symptoms. Now, and also one in two women postmenopausal will suffer an osteoporosis fracture, and that is down to a lack of estrogen in their bodies. So HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is what it says on the box. It's replacing the estrogen and progesterone back into a woman's body. Now, there've been a lot of scaremongering stories around it. There's a lot of and the press have spun a number of stories out of control. There have been some links and perceived association with breast cancer, but what most people realize that there is no study showing that there is an increased risk of death due to breast cancer from taking HRT. If you take estrogen only, there's no increased risk. And women of average menopausal age are more at risk of contracting, not dying, contracting breast cancer from drinking 2 glasses of wine a night, having an unhealthy diet, or being obese than they are from taking HRT. HRT has advanced a lot over the last even 5 to 10 years. Even what is available on the NHS is natural. The products I'm showing here are they're natural, body identical, so they're plant-based, and they have the same makeup as the hormones in our bodies. Very briefly, the safest form of HRT is the top 2, either a gel or a patch. So it gets absorbed through through your skin, or the woman's skin. Why it is safer? Because it reduces any risk of blood clots. So certainly women who have very bad migraines, for example, or increased blood pressure can safely take estrogen through the skin. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, progesterone is very important to protect the womb for women who have a womb, and the product at the bottom here is progesterone, micronized progesterone, natural, the same makeup as the hormone in our body, or some women have a Mirena coil and use that to give them progesterone. So overall, the benefits of taking HRT far outweigh the risks, because not only does it alleviate the symptoms, I'm just having a quick look at the chat function. Not only it doesn't just alleviate our symptoms and effectively get our lives back. Certainly Linda and myself, and actually my sister, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs without HRT. Yes, we would some days, but not day in, day out, because of the challenges that we had and faced. But also, it's not just that, it's also it future-proofs our body. So it future-proofs our body against the future risks of heart disease, as I touched on before, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, and dementia. Actually, I'm not going to get distracted by the chat functions now, because I'm not sure that some of them are relevant for me. So there are complementary therapies as well, and a lot of women find, as well as taking HRT, or even not, and I would say if you know someone or who's had breast cancer, I would say, you know, certainly get individualized advice, because just because someone has had breast cancer, it does not necessarily mean that you can't take HRT. I know a number of women, and there's some podcasts out there, including that Liz Earle has done, for example, it doesn't mean that if you've had breast cancer, you can't take HRT. There are a lot of complementary therapies out there that work for lots of, I mean, especially now anyway, I mean, whether you're male, female, menopausal or not, you know, whether mindfulness, you know, yoga, for example, Reiki, the advice from the NICE guidance, as they're called, the National Institute of Care and Excellence, state that the first line treatment recommended for menopause is either HRT or CBT, which is my little diagram here with the cogs in the brain, cognitive behavioral therapy, which again, some of the organizations you work with might offer it, because quite often it is offered as part through either counseling or through the support channels that you might have, or you can get that through your GP. There are also a lot of alternative medicines out there, and what I should say, as I mentioned before, what works for one person might not work for somebody else, and definitely look for the kite mark here, the kite mark. Natural over the counter doesn't necessarily mean safer or better, and it won't replace the hormones in a woman's body. So there's a real plethora, and we have you know, usually a lot of discussion at our women's conferences talking about what works for one, what works for another. But because we're so different, just because one of these products, say Menopause, works for some and Menopause is a good overall multivitamin, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for somebody else. But also what is important is lifestyle changes. So we do encourage women to have a little bit look at their lifestyle and look at the body MOT. So how can rather than we suffer through this phase in our lives, how can we actually work through it? How can we actually take stock from looking at our diet, looking at our lifestyle, and a lot of organisations have set up menopause support groups. Somebody's already mentioned that, I think it was their sister that's involved in a menopause cafe. There are menopause cafes around the country. A lot of organisations, so the West Midlands Police is an example, BAE Systems, they set up a menopause support group. So sharing, because sharing helps so much, even though everybody's different, but we like to talk, don't we, as women, and actually sharing and having the opportunity to talk in a safe space is really, really important. Especially when suffering. So that lifestyle part, if you like, is really, really important to look at. You know, a lot of women we encourage to buddy up, to perhaps not, I know, more challenging at the moment if you're not physically in work, but you can set each other challenge to try a new menu a week. Back in the office, perhaps make lunch for somebody else, but also and what a number of organisations have done, again when we're back into work, but you could still actually at the moment have a telephone conversation while you're both walking. You don't need to, you know, actually get out and exercise rather than just sitting at your desk all the time. One important thing I do want to just highlight is that over the age of 45, women do not need to have, or should not have, blood tests taken to diagnose the menopause. It should be diagnosed on their symptoms. Because a lot of women over the age of 45 blood tests are taken. As you saw from the graph, if the estrogen levels are quite high, they will be dismissed as not being menopausal, whereas clearly the guidelines are over the age of 45, women should be diagnosed from their symptoms, not from blood tests. So overall, majority of women aren't wanting to make employers aware of their symptoms because of some of the reasons we've touched on here. And over two-thirds say they have no support at work. Majority of women, not surprisingly, at work will talk to a friendly colleague. Won't naturally, and actually less than 10% will talk to their line manager, even lower to HR. Most women aren't even aware that there's an occupational health service there. They don't really know what their EAP offers them. So that is something to perhaps be mindful of if you are either menopausal yourself or working with somebody who might be. So because you as a manager as well, it's really important that you have your own support routes, because we would never expect managers to be an experts in menopause, but actually know where to signpost and support women within the organisation, and what support is there for you as managers to actually have that conversation, because it's really hard, you know, for anybody, but especially possibly a male manager, to approach a woman and have that conversation. Wanted to put this up here. Now, these are just quotes from our surveys of what the feedback on the importance of either how women have been feeling at work or feel that what needs to change in their workplace. So I'm not going to talk through these, but I just thought I would share those with you. Then we can talk about perhaps if your own experiences shortly. So reasonable adjustment passport. Do any of you have reasonable adjustments in your workplaces at the moment at all? Sorry, just anybody have reasonable adjustments? So what some organised one know. So what we encourage organisations to consider is something called a reasonable adjustment passport. Yes, somebody has said, so perhaps you know, we can talk. So a few yeses. So it'd be interesting to see if any of you currently have reasonable adjustments for menopause, or menopausal symptoms, should I say. So reasonable adjustment passport, what is it? So it's not just menopause, it supports staff with complex or long-term health needs, which is really what we're talking about here. It should be, now a lot of organisations say we need a menopause policy, we've got to get a menopause policy going, and actually it's about aligning your other policies to include menopausal symptoms or the adjustments that need to be made. So it's not necessarily that new policies need to be written. It's supportive and collaborative, totally promotes equality and inclusion, but it's individual, because actually a reasonable adjustment passport is owned by the individual woman, and actually, or a man, sorry, if we're not talking about menopause, if it's other complex long-term health needs, and it enables that individual to work on equal terms, and for the people around him or her to have an understanding of what their challenges are and what might be a good day and what might a bad day look like. So it's done in collaboration with the manager. Oh, sorry. It's done in collaboration with the manager, and even if the manager changes, it's something that the individual takes with them. So it's a living record of these reasonable adjustments. So I've mentioned stays with them, regularly reviewed and updated. And it's almost that open paper to help the manager understand the challenges, but also to share with the colleagues, for colleagues to also understand, to be able to possibly support the individual when they're having not such a good day. And as it mentions here, it's important that there's a good day and a bad day, because actually a good day, somebody might not even be firing at 9 or 10 out of 10 when they're going through menopausal symptoms, but a bad day, they're perhaps lucky if they get a 1 or 2 out of 10. So it's important that what those good and bad days look like are actually recorded, and what adjustments need to be made. So here are some examples. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to put them up on the screen, because I'm also conscious of the time. But actually, a lot of these, especially now in current climates, certainly, you know, with COVID and parents having to juggle other responsibilities, certainly those with children and homeschooling in some cases, I think organisations are having to be a lot more, or have had to be a lot more flexible anyway, haven't they, in the last few months. But actually, when you look through this list, whether and it's not necessarily, for example, looking at changing start times necessarily every day of the week, it might just be on certain days. Clearly, if the individual is frontline staff or work shifts, it's a lot harder to change the start times, but perhaps some more regular breaks can be introduced. So it's actually formalizing more some of these challenges. It could be some environmental changes to the workplace, like it says here about desking, moving the desk, or better ventilation in the offices. Or it might be helping them identify a safe place to go to if they're struggling, whether they're having a hot flush or emotional outburst, or might be, having a horrendous bleed and just have to, escape to somewhere other than the toilet. Are they got access to showers, for example? Or actually just need some help because they can't physically cope certain days with just their day-to-day tasks that perhaps some days they could do really easily and other days they struggle with, so perhaps need extra support. I'm just going to quickly flick onto the chat and say anything. Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute. I was just checking there wasn't any pressing questions. So some women do obviously have to change their role, but hopefully by introducing these reasonable adjustments, and I'm just going to show you here an example, a live example. So this is a live example of someone who worked in an office space, not a frontline role, at West Midlands Police. And now on the left-hand side, you can see very typical symptoms that I've talked about. She was on the verge of leaving her job. Now looking at, on the right-hand side, the solutions that she sat down and discussed and agreed with her manager enabled her to stay in her job. And you can look at them, and actually they are quite simple and straightforward, to be perfectly honest, from desk fans, regular breaks. She was really struggling with her priorities and her priorities management, time management, which a lot of people do anyway, don't they? But she managed to discuss that, and through her manager and her colleagues, they helped her to create an automated priority management system, which helped her for reminders, to help her feel that she wasn't just writing lists for lists for lists, and she was actually putting more structure into it, and also being able to offload certain tasks when she felt that she couldn't actually cope and fulfill them. So ultimately, the team were made aware of her challenges, it was changed and reviewed regularly, and ultimately she became the D&I lead for the age for her department, and actually went on to run the menopause support group. But also, which hopefully is my next slide, 5 years on, which was last autumn, this is a quote from her. So she felt, not surprisingly, that reasonable adjustment passport was pivotal to her ongoing welfare at the time, and enabled her to stay in her organisation. So workplace audits can be carried out. I haven't got time to go through all of these. I just wanted to put them up on the screen as examples, some of which we have touched on, ranging from whether it be the health and safety, looking at the environmental aspects for staff with challenges. Absent management is absolutely key, because I can guarantee that probably most, if not all, of your organisations don't have an absentee criteria for menopause. Organisations are starting to, and I can guarantee that if there are some of your colleagues or any of you on the webinar who have been off sick with menopausal symptoms, I can guarantee that you probably didn't share that, or you didn't call in sick today for my menopause. But hopefully that will come. About flexible working anyway at the moment, and as I've said, it's about guidelines and adapting existing policies. But overall, and I hope a big thing that I really want you, having the confidence to have a conversation. So it's trying to normalize it, having that conversation. I will challenge you to mention the word menopause at least 3 times with a work colleague over the next week, and put it out there, see what reaction you get. I'm not expecting you to talk about vaginal dryness, but you know, say you sat in on a menopause webinar, and what do they know about menopause? So I won't check up on you, but I do challenge you to do that. So overall, my message is really for organisations to ensure it is part of a wellbeing programme. There are a lot of subjects, aren't there, on a wellbeing agenda at the moment. You know, nobody is sitting there, you know, with menopause at the top of the list, really. But a lot of organisations are positively embracing it. I mentioned some of the fire services have made it mandatory for managers. There's a couple of banks that hopefully going to roll out our CPD accredited online program that we have aimed at all employees. It's about normalising it, as I said, ensuring there is a safe place for women to discuss it, and also that it's part of equality and diversity, and manager training. Put it on the agenda for that future management trainees, and ultimately make it visible, potentially with using tools like a reasonable adjustment passport. I'm just going to leave this slide up, but you've got access to the slides anyway. You don't feel you need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of information out there. I'm not here to sell my sister, but she I don't know if any of you, some of you come across her. She's been in the media quite a lot in the last few weeks. Was on Women's Hour a few weeks ago, and she has written this book, which I will hold up. It's a Haynes manual. So for any enthusiasts out there, it's a Haynes manual for menopause, which is a very easy guide, easy to read for everybody. It touches on relationships in menopause, managing teenagers, and HRT, menopause at work. That's something that some of you might be interested in. The Faculty of Occupational Medicine has some guidance on the workplace. The CIPD, which we've inputted into, has some really useful guides for employees and managers. So again, there is information out there. ACAS, again, is another one. So there is a lot of information out there. The NICE guidelines I've mentioned and I referred to, and those are really, all GPs should adhere to the NICE guidelines, but the majority of GPs have not read the guidelines for menopause. So frustratingly, quite a lot of the work we end up doing is educating and supporting women in how to have that conversation with their GP and get the right treatment available. So there's a few little pointers there, hopefully that some of you might be interested in. I'm now going to be quiet for a few minutes. Say a big thank you for listening. It was very much a whistle-stop tour, but I felt important to cover some facts about the menopause and solutions as well as the workplace. But interested to hear your questions or discussions as well about your thoughts on menopause in the workplace.
Sarah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And we had some really great debate going on in the chat room, so it's brilliant. I'm going to go straight